Do you have a few minutes?
I gotta make some changes in my life.
Do you even realize what your life means?
Morning Cup of Joe, a Missouri S&T podcast using pop culture to destigmatize mental health.
Fake laugh, hiding real pain.
Do not self-destruct.
I didn't ask for this to happen.
Join us in using everyday examples to explain usable techniques to help improve your mental well-being.
Stay a while and listen.
Welcome back, minors. My name is Tracy Kriegel, and I'm a counselor here at Student Wellbeing.
And my name is Amber Chostin. I'm also a counselor here in Student Wellbeing, and it's time for your Morning Cup of Joe. So, Tracy, this week I want to talk about coping mechanisms. And to illustrate this concept, I am using the classic series, Lord of the Rings. It's such a good series.
It really is, Amber. It has adventure, friendship, love. Oh, it's epic. So coping mechanisms are the way we respond to stressors in our life. Some coping mechanisms are positive and others are unhealthy. When we say unhealthy, we mean that by engaging in the coping mechanisms, we have an overall negative effect in our lives.
Mm-hmm. A lot of things can fall into either category, but the patterns that appear as a result of the coping mechanisms is what indicates whether it's healthy or not, rather than the actual technique itself. Unhealthy coping mechanisms are things that we do to reduce symptoms in the short term rather than addressing the root of the problem. Overeating or undereating, social withdrawal, overthinking, toxic positivity, self-harm, sleeping too much, drinking, drug use. All of these things are unhealthy coping mechanisms.
Now, the interesting thing is that we can make a list all day of unhealthy ways people have coped. And yes, there are ones that are more uncommon, but there are always going to be ones that are missed, right? For the purposes of this podcast, we're going to be looking at the signs that you have been using an unhealthy coping mechanism. Because even something seemingly healthy, like running or working out, can be done in a way that seems unhealthy. But how does this tie into the Lord of the Rings, Amber?
Well, for a bit of background, first, Lord of the Rings was a book series, and then it was adapted to film. Not once, but twice. And then once in the late 70s as an animated series, and again in the early 2000s as a live action directed by Peter Jackson. Most recently, it's been a prequel series that's hit Prime Video, which is based on the book entitled Silmarillion. So to give our listeners a little synopsis of the story, just in case they've never seen or read the Lord of the Rings series.
Okay, so here we go. The Lord of the Rings is a fantasy story of a young hobbit named Frodo Baggins, who inherits a ring from his uncle. He finds the ring as a powerful ancient artifact created by the evil Dark Lord Sauron. Frodo is cast as the reluctant hero who must deliver the ring to Mount Doom, the place it was forged, to destroy it and the chances of Sauron regaining power over Middle-earth. It is the end of the story as laid out by Tolkien, picking up after 60 years after The Hobbit and about 2,500 years after the Silmarillion.
So it really is an epic story. It just kind of goes on like really a long time. It's really a long time. It's kind of the definition of epic, right? Epic. So now throughout the series, many people are after the ring. Everybody wants it because the ring pretty much symbolizes power. Sauron, of course, wants it. But of course, anyone who the ring calls to. It's a source of immense power and evil. As such, people are drawn to possessing it and using that power. One of the characters is a creature named Gollum. Gollum was obsessed with the ring to the point that he calls it my precious. He kept the ring for hundreds of years before Bilbo Baggins, which is Frodo's uncle, stole it from him. So now he has become obsessed with regaining the ring by whatever means necessary.
So let's start off with what the ring does for those who wear it. It makes you invisible and extends your life beyond nature's span. Gollum was once a hobbit named Smeagol. Just like Frodo and Bilbo, he was supposed to live around 100 years. But Gollum was almost 600 years old. So he was an old guy, right?
Yeah. Like hobbits, like for those of you outside of like the Lord of the Rings world, when we look at like D&D and other systems, we would call a hobbit a halfling in those systems. So they're basically small humans. Okay. So approximately same lifespan.
But he didn't look or act like a hobbit anymore. So, in fact, his entire personality and appearance changed because of the ring's influence. He began his life as a Smeagol, but became Gollum when he lost his humanity. So, hobbitanity. Hobbitanity.
That's one way to put it. Like not humanity, hobbitanity.
Hobbitanity.
Okay.
Oh my gosh, I feel like I'm saying like a habanero, hobbitanity. He was hot. He was a hobbit.
What do you call it in that case? You can't really call it humanity, right?
He was a hobbit.
Hobbit.
Okay, sorry. Diverging.
That wouldn't be us if we didn't go on tangents.
Nope, it would not be. Okay, so for Smeagol, the shift really began when his cousin found the ring in a river while the two of them were fishing. Smeagol was instantly tempted by it and asked for his cousin to give it to him for his birthday, which the cousin absolutely refused. So he's like, no way, not happening.
Yeah, it was his birthday, and he's like, hey, give me the ring.
No, not happening. So when Smeagol was unable to take his cousin or talk to his cousin into giving it to him, he killed his cousin and took it. Like wow.
Yeah. He was so obsessed with it upon just seeing it. And he had to have it to the point that he was willing to kill his cousin to get it right off the bat. So let's rewind here. Smeagol came under the influence of the ring very, very, very quickly. Like I said, it was instant. He sees it. He wants to have it right now. He's willing to kill for it immediately. Not just kill, but kill somebody that he loves and cares about. This is contrary to other characters who possessed the ring for a long time and had very limited ill effects.
So I think it had to do a lot with where the character was before they got the ring. Now for Smeagol, he was a wealthy aristocrat, but Gandalf tells Frodo in the Fellowship of the Ring that Smeagol didn't really fit into the life. He was drawn to diving into pools and digging into the earth. So in other words, he didn't fit in well in this community and his life, right?
Yeah, he felt pretty isolated.
Yeah.
And so when his cousin found the ring at the bottom of the river, his immediate response was that he wanted it. And he lacked the ability to handle the stressor of the ring calling to him, because the ring calls to everyone. And because he was already in that vulnerable position, and then that added on top of the fact of, now the ring is calling to him, he doesn't have the ability to resist it. He doesn't have a strong support network. He already felt isolated. He already felt misunderstood. And the power of the ring made him feel desperate. And so it can be assumed that at this time that he found the ring, his mental health was not in a very good shape. Certainly not in the good shape not in the same shape as like Frodo or Bilbo's were when they initially found the ring.
Right, so I think that's a pretty safe assumption. So mental health prior to a stressor plays a big role on an ability to adapt and cope to a stressor.
Absolutely. If the call of the ring was a stressor, we can approach his isolation and social withdrawal as the unhealthy coping mechanisms. Yeah.
That, and he found that using the ring made him invisible and gave him power. Right.
Smeagol used the invisibility powers of the ring to spy on others. So he was already feeling resentful because he was kind of cast, like he was an outsider in his own community. And so now he's got the ability to spy on them, see what they're having to say about him, and now he's resentful for it. So he starts playing practical jokes and pranks on people. And the more he hid, the more the ring took hold. So he became more and more. Does this sound familiar? Kind of sounds like the path of addiction, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, very, very similar. Like that was what always struck me about it, because it sounds so similar to substance use. So the more he hid, the more the ring took hold, and the more isolated he became from his peers. The more he was isolated, the more angry and petty he became, which annoyed his family, which further rejected him. He became more of an outsider, and it just became this spiral of things getting worse and worse and worse for him.
Yeah, so when someone uses tools and things around them to avoid their feelings, we we call this escapism. And Gollum was using the ring to escape the rejection he felt, in turn as a way to strike back at the people he felt rejected, who he felt were rejecting him. He blamed them for the rejection instead of looking at his own behavior. He wasn't looking inward, he was looking outward. He was being mean and disruptive, invading other people's privacy, and as a result, he was making them mad. But he didn't see it that way. He only saw the rejection. He began to hate them and himself for that. He was mad at everybody else. There was no inward thinking; it was all outward thinking.
And there's an interesting correlation to be made here, like I said, with substance use and the patterns around substance use. We can also, it often takes a similar path of isolating ourselves and separating from your support systems. In addition, in substance use, you can also see the blaming of others for that use and the failure to accept responsibility for your problems. This can happen with behavior that we feel shame about engaging with, not just substance use, but any behavior that we feel shame about. We start feeling like we're angry when people call us out for doing this thing. You see this with like binge eating, smoking, procrastination, even missing class. I miss a class, therefore I can't go back to class because people will judge me. Therefore I miss more classes, which makes me feel more like they're going to judge me, which makes it even harder to go back to class. And we see that a lot. We isolate ourselves because we become ashamed. And the more we isolate, the more ashamed we become. We start judging ourselves, and because of this, we assume that others will judge us the same way that we are judging ourselves.
Right. In Gollum, we see this as the form of self-hatred and self-pity. We see this as the most when he is talking to himself. The part of him that's still Smeagol is addressing Gollum and vice versa. Gollum tells Smeagol he's a murderer, and that he's not good enough. You're never good enough. He tells him everyone hates him. This correlates strongly with the negative self-talk we engage in when we feel shame and remorse about something. In a metaphorical sense, we are talking to ourselves and telling these things to ourselves inside our own mind in much the same way. These types of thoughts spiral, leading to further shame and further self-pity, the same as it does with Smeagol and Gollum.
And Peter Jackson does a really interesting way, because he actually has two versions. Like, you have Smeagol and like the Smeagol character, which is the same appearance as Gollum, but he's got more of a kind face. Like, his face is more open and his eyes are raised up and he looks more kind and vulnerable almost. And then you have the other side of the screen, and it'll flip back and forth between the two faces, and the other side is Gollum, and he's angry and mad, and he's hates the world, and he says and he hates us, and says these things, telling these, and this very much mimics that internal dialogue that we have in our own heads when we're doing something that we're ashamed of, and we want to blame our behavior on others because it's easier to say, they hate us, they're never going to like us, nobody likes us, and that kind of thing, because then that allows that. I always, like, when I worked with substance use, I used to say that it's like that, the Bugs Bunny cartoons, who you the little devil and the little angel, and they would sit there and talk to you? Yeah. Substance use was like that. It wants to continue to exist, or unhealthy coping mechanisms, we'll just say that in general. They want to continue to exist. So they're going to continue to sit there and tell you all of these things to keep themselves existing. Because they don't want you to stop.
Right, exactly. Gollum absolutely does all this. You hear him all the time complaining about how evil and filthy the goblins are and how they will betray him. He blames everyone else for his issues and sees himself as the victim always in this situation. Never takes accountability for anything.
Yeah, and that's why often in recovery we see people needing to take accountability. Like, that's usually one of the very first steps of recovery. We have to see our own role in the dynamics and how our actions affect those around us. And often we're in so much pain that we're oblivious to how much we're hurting others. It's really shocking when you get somebody that's been dramatically hurting their family, because like I said, when we're talking about most people's unhealthy coping mechanisms aren't to this degree, so we're kind of using these extremes to kind of give you an idea of like, this is what the extreme looks like, so you can recognize the lesser degrees of it. But when somebody's in one of those extreme coping mechanisms, the degree to which it hurts the people around them, it's shocking that they're completely unable to recognize that it hurts. Like, you have somebody that's heavily using drugs and they'll steal from family members, like steal, I've seen people steal wedding rings and sentimental items and pawn them in order to buy drugs and things like that. And like I said, this is an extreme example, but are the processes the same? Yes, they are. But they're completely unable to see that it's wrong.
Right.
Because the addiction is telling them this is what it has to do in order to continue to exist. And I talk about it like the addiction is a separate being, and it's not, but it's your brain. It's almost like it's arguing with itself, just like Smeagol and Gollum.
Right, sure. And, when you hear you saying this, it's Gollum was being cut off from any and all of his healthy coping mechanisms. He eventually gives into his unhealthy coping mechanisms. He both loves and hates the ring, just as he loves and he hates himself. And when it takes from him, he endangers himself to get it back. He cannot cope. He can't cope without it. It's both the cause of his life's decline, but also the only thing that he's living for.
Right. And that, again, mirrors that unhealthy coping mechanisms. Because when somebody is heavily in that unhealthy coping mechanisms, they both need it and love it and also hate it at the same time and resent it because of the role that it plays in their life. And that's where Gollum was. And this is how that can self-destruct somebody. And you see what he's going through a lot with that late stage addiction. Not all unhealthy coping mechanisms are going to get to this degree. Like, not everybody that has unhealthy coping mechanisms is going to get to this extreme like we're talking about. But they can often lead to many of the same things: isolation, social withdrawal, complaining, self-pity, cognitive exhaustion, cognitive avoidance, denial, wishful thinking, rumination, intrusive thoughts, blaming others, projection, and even aggression.
Right.
And those are the ones that those are the effects you're going to more likely see unless you're in that late stage addiction. I want you to think about somebody that has a habit that's unhealthy, like any habit. And when somebody mentions it, how do they respond? Do they get angry?
They usually support their habit.
Right.
Yeah.
Do they get defensive?
Yeah.
Do they minimize it? Do they make excuses for the behavior? Those are all signs that you're using an unhealthy coping mechanism.
Right. So all really good points, Amber. So next week, minors, we're going to expand further and go into healthy coping mechanisms, because we gave you the bad side. So next week, we're going to give you the good side. We're going to leave you on a cliffhanger this week. And we're going to talk about what they are and all these good healthy coping skills and how to make sure that the ways you are coping with stressors is healthy and setting yourself up for success. Because that's where we want to help you find success, ways to a path of success. So join us next week for our episode on healthy coping skills.
Absolutely. Thank you for joining us this week, minors, and we will see you next week.
Take care. If you like this podcast, please remember to like and subscribe. To schedule an appointment or to reach out to us about future topics you would like to see, please email us at wellbeing@mst.edu. You can also reach us by phone at 573-341-4211. We are located at 204 Norwood Hall.
I accept the challenge.
Get out there and do your best!
Hey, go easy on yourself. Come on now.
Now you're talking!
For more mental health and well-being content, please follow us on Facebook at Missouri S&T Wellbeing and on Instagram at S&T Wellbeing.
But most importantly,
never give up.